Alright guys, hope you and yours are well. Back here in Castle Hill, wee message for yous. Allegedly back in full lockdown. I'll go back to what I said on my Hug My Name message about manufacturing consent. This is what's been happening throughout lockdown. It's been happening way before lockdown. They've been using this tactic for long enough, but that's what's happening right now, guys. You're manufacturing your consent. I'm going to edit a wee edit on the end of this video to explain manufacturing consent a wee bit more detail. The guy called Professor Noam Chomsky wrote a book about manufacturing consent in I think the 60s or maybe the 70s, and there's a 3-hour feature film, Noam Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent, on YouTube. I'll put the link in the description below so you can watch it, but at the end of this video I'm going to do a wee 5-minute introduction, along with there's a wee 5-minute animated sort of feature film about Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, just to give you an idea of what's happening here, because they need your consent for everything, guys. You're the boss, you're the king of your kingdom, or the queen of your kingdom. You decide what's happening, not them. So you just need to start your own research and look into what's happening, look into what's going on around you. And as I said in that Hug My Name video as well, like, your silence is your consent. In a court of law, if a lawyer is silent when something's being said, he's consenting to it. He needs to object, or because his silence is his consent. His silence in your acquiescence is your consent. Your acquiescence sitting on your arse, doing fuck all about it, that's your acquiescence, and your silence is your consent. So you need to get up off your arse, do something about it. Do not consent. If you do not consent, do something about it. Now, Noam Chomsky's manufacturing consent is basically how they use propaganda to manufacture your consent, and how they use it through advertising and mass media to manufacture your consent. Another way they manufacture your consent is by vote. By voting, you're giving them consent to rule over you. You're given consent to be subject to all statutes, acts and regulations. So, general election in Scotland coming up in a couple of months. I just want to give a wee heads up to everybody, to anybody who votes in this general election is consenting to this whole thing. We need to break free, away from all this. We need to be free for government, free for rule, and the only rule is self-rule. It's the only way forward, guys. We need to break free, guys, build anew. It's the only way out. We need to build anew, start the game ourselves, and start through the communities up. Because this illusion of government, illusion of authority, is what's going to bring us down. There isn't a government, it's an illusion. The government is the community. In Scotland, the government is the community. This illusion of this monster that can tell us what to do, and this authority that doesn't exist. The only authority is yourself. The people of Scotland are sovereign. You're a sovereign being. Nobody has any power over you. You know that deep down. I'm just pointing it out to you. Up and rise into your power. Protect your sovereignty and the people around you. Your freedom's my responsibility. My freedom's your responsibility. What are you doing about it? What are you doing about your kids' freedom? Future generations, what are you doing about it? Your silence is your consent. Your acquiescence is your consent. Sitting on your arse doing fuck all about it is your acquiescence. Up and rise. Don't give them your consent. Enjoy the Noam Chomsky feature film. It's 3 hours long, but there's a wee 5-minute introduction to explain it in a wee bit. I've squeezed it down into condensed it into a wee 10-minute feature for you. But stay sovereign, guys. Don't consent.
You write in Manufacturing Consent that it's the primary function of the mass media in the United States to mobilize public support for the special interests that dominate the government and the private sector. What are those interests?
Well, if you want to understand the way any society works, ours or any other, the first place to look is who is in a position to make the decisions that determine the way the society functions. Societies differ, but in ours, the major decisions over what happens in the society, decisions over investment and production and distribution and so on, are in the hands of a relatively concentrated network of major corporations and conglomerates and investment firms and so on. They are also the ones who staff the major executive positions in the government, and they're the ones who own the media, and they're the ones who have to be in a position to make the decisions. They have an overwhelmingly dominant role in the way life happens, what's done in the society. Within the economic system, by law and in principle, they dominate. The control over resources and the need to satisfy their interests imposes very sharp constraints on the political system and the ideological system.
When we talk about manufacturing of consent, whose consent is being manufactured?
We can, to start with, there are two different groups. We can get into more detail, but at the first level of approximation, there's two targets for propaganda. One is what's sometimes called the political class. There's maybe 20% of the population which is relatively educated, more or less articulate. They play some kind of role in decision-making. They're supposed to sort of participate in social life, either as managers or cultural managers, like, say, teachers and writers and so on. They're supposed to vote. They're supposed to play some role in the way economic and political and cultural life goes on. Now, their consent is crucial. It's one group that has to be deeply indoctrinated. Then there's maybe 80% of the population whose main function is to follow orders and not to think, and not to pay attention to anything. And they're the ones who usually pay the costs.
All right. Professor Chomsky, Noam, you outlined a model with filters that propaganda is sent through. That's way to the public. Can you briefly outline those?
It's basically an institutional analysis of the major media, what we call a propaganda model. We're talking primarily about the national media, those media that sort of set a general agenda that others more or less adhere to the extent that they even pay much attention to national or international affairs. Now, the elite media are the sort of the agenda-setting media. That means the New York Times, the Washington Post, the major television channels, and so on. They set the general framework. Local media more or less adapt to their structure.
World News. Begins to sound like it says that there's a beachhead.
I think 628 is a good one.
Yeah, but I think 6 is a good start. This is the operative soundbite for us. He's ours. He really knows how to time it.
We've got a minute for all the time, so that's...
I love this soundbite.
Okay, well...
And they do this in all sorts of ways, by selection of topics, by distribution of concerns, by emphasis and framing of issues, by filtering of information, by bounding of debate within certain limits.
2.5 minutes to air. 45 seconds.
They determine, they select, they shape, they control, they restrict in order to serve the interests of dominant elite groups in the society.
There is an unusual amount of attention focused today on the 5 nations of Central America.
This is Democracy's Diary. Here for our instruction are triumphs and disasters, the pattern of life's changing fabric. Here is great journalism, a revelation of the past, a guide to the present, and a clue to the future.
Beep, beep, beep. Propaganda. Many use the word when talking about countries like North Korea, Kazakhstan, Iran. Countries viewed as authoritarian through the lens of the Western media. Press freedom, freedom of thought. People use those terms when talking about countries like the United States, France, Australia, democracies. In 1988, Noam Chomsky co-authored a book with Edward Herman called Manufacturing Consent. It blasted apart the notion that media acts as a check on political power, that media inform the public, serve the public, so that we can better engage in the political process. In fact, media manufacture our consent. They tell us what those in power need them to tell us so we can fall in line. Democracy is staged with the help of media that work as propaganda machines. Media operate through 5 filters. The first has to do with ownership. Mass media firms are big corporations. Often they're part of even bigger conglomerates. Their endgame, profit. And so it's in their interests to push for whatever guarantees that profit. Critical journalism takes second place to the needs and interests of the corporation. The second filter exposes the real role of advertising. Media costs a lot more than consumers will ever pay. So who fills the gap? Advertisers. And what are the advertisers paying for? Audiences. And so it isn't so much that the media are selling you a product, their output. They're also selling advertisers a product, you. How does the establishment manage the media? That's the third filter. Journalism cannot be a check on power because the very system encourages complicity. Governments, corporations, big institutions know how to play the media game. They know how to influence the news narrative. They feed media scoops, official accounts, interviews with the experts. They make themselves crucial to the process of journalism. So those in power and those who report on them are in bed with each other. If you want to challenge power, you'll be pushed to the margins. Your name won't be down. You won't be getting in. You've lost your access. You've lost the story. When the media, journalists, whistleblowers, sources, stray away from the consensus, they get flat. That's the fourth filter. When the story is inconvenient for the powers that be, you'll see the flak machine in action, discrediting sources, trashing stories, and diverting the conversation. To manufacture consent, you need an enemy, a target. That common enemy is the fifth filter. Communism, terrorists, immigrants, a common enemy. A boogeyman to fear helps corral public opinion. 5 filters, one big media theory. Consent is being manufactured all around you, all the time.
Huh?
Good morning, welcome to Aaron. Good morning, welcome to Aaron Mills Town Center. 3, 2, 1, take 2. Good morning, welcome to Aaron Mills Town Center, the home of the world's largest permanent point-of-purchase video wall installation. My name is Calvin Fluke, and I'm your video host all day here at EMTV. I want to take this opportunity to extend a very special and warm welcome to the film crew from Necessary Illusions. We've got an excellent lineup of television programming for you today, so let's get on with it.
So how long have they been working on this documentary?
Gosh, they've been working on it, I don't know how long, but I know every country I show up, they're always there.
They're there, huh?
Yeah, they were in England, they were in Japan. place.
Jeez.
They must have 500 hours worth of tape by now.
But they put together a real doozy when they're done, huh?
I can't imagine who's going to want to hear somebody talk for an hour, but I guess they know what they're doing.
So where are y'all from?
Florida.
Florida?
Yeah.
Y'all talk like a chorus. We're making a film about Noam Chomsky. Does anybody know who Noam Chomsky is?
No.
Good afternoon and welcome to Wyoming Talks. My guest today is well-known intellectual Noam Chomsky. Thank you for being on our program today.
Very glad to be here.
Well, I know probably the main purpose for your trip to Wyoming is to discuss thought control in a democratic society. Now, I'd say I'm just Jane, USA, and I say, well, gee, this is a democratic society, and what do you mean thought control? I make up my own mind. I create my own destiny. What would you say to her?
Well, I would suggest that Jane take a close look at the way the media operate, the way the public relations industry operates, the extensive thinking that's been going on for a long, long period about the necessity for finding ways to marginalize and control the public in democratic society. But particularly to look at the evidence that's been accumulated about the way the major media, the sort of agenda-setting media, I mean the national press and the television and so on, the way that they shape and control the kinds of opinions that appear, the kinds of information that comes through, the sources to which they go, and so on. And I think that Jane will find some very surprising things about the democratic system.
I'd like to welcome all of you to this lecture today. Several years ago, Professor Chomsky was described in the New York Times Book Review as follows: judged in terms of the power, range, novelty, and influence of his thought, Noam Chomsky is arguably the most important intellectual alive. Professor Noam Chomsky.